Welcome to another edition of the Inspired Stories podcast, where leaders share their experiences so we can learn from their successes and be inspired by how they've overcome adversity. My name is Anthony Codispoti, and today's guest is Rick Smilow. Rick is the CEO and chairman of the Institute of Culinary Education, better known as ICE. For more than 50 years, ICE has trained aspiring chefs and hospitality pros through hands-on programs in culinary arts, pastry and baking, restaurant management, and even health-focused cooking. With campuses in both New York City and Los Angeles and flexible online options, the school now counts over 19,000 alumni working in kitchens around the world. Under Rick's guidance, ICE has been named Best Culinary School in America by USA Today and has seen faculty and graduates collect James Beard Awards. He himself serves on the board of Daniel Boulud's The Next Restaurant Group, City Harvest, and the Careers Through Culinary Arts program, showing his commitment to industry excellence and food rescue efforts. Today, we'll hear how he grew a vocational school into a global culinary community. But before we get into all that good stuff, today's episode is brought to you by my company, Add Back Benefits Agency, where we offer very specific and unique employee benefits that are both great for your team and fiscally optimized for your bottom line. So imagine being able to give your restaurant employees free access to doctors, therapists, and prescription medications. And here's the fun part. The program actually puts more money into your employees' pockets and the company's too. One recent client was able to increase net profits by $900 per employee per year. Results vary for each company, and some organizations may not be eligible. To find out if your company qualifies, contact us today at addbackbenefits.com. All right, back to our guest today, Chairman and CEO of Institute of Culinary Education, Rick Smilow. Thanks for making the time to share your story today.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here.
So, Rick, before we get into ICE, you've got an interesting work history. You started your career back in late 70s and early 80s in something that many people aren't familiar with today, print magazines. And you were on the sales and distribution side of things. Talk about how that work laid a foundation for you going forward.
Well, yeah, to put it in an overall concept, everybody thinks that I was a chef or a restaurateur, and that's not the case. I would consider myself a marketing guy. When I went to business school, my focus was on marketing, and I always wanted to eventually become an entrepreneur. But my first job out of college was in the magazine business, but not on the editorial side. It was in advertising space sales, back when there was no such thing as internet advertising or social media advertising. And I would, there's a general adage. It's something my late father said. It's like it's always good to be in sales. When you spend time in sales early in your career, you learn how to listen to people. You learn how to be persuasive, and I think those skills serve someone forever. But a little bit to add to it, you say, well, why magazines? I think from an early age, I recognized that I liked what we call content as a product, but I wanted to be on the business side of it. And clearly, magazines, in the 70s and 80s and 90s and to this day, are repositories of content. And in a similar related way, a culinary school is a repository of content. So the linkage between what I do now isn't so much that I was in advertising sales, but that they were both content businesses.
Okay, interesting. Let's continue to connect the dots, because after that, you went to MBA school, and then you worked under the Nabisco Brands umbrella as a product manager for Fleischmann's, which, among other things, made margarine, right?
Right.
Help us continue to connect the dots here. What did you pick up in terms of work knowledge and experience here?
I picked up the idea that I hope I or nobody else I ever meet or like has to go to a margarine tasting.
Okay, say more about that. Not a big fan,
but,
huh?
I had gone to Northwestern Business School, Kellogg Business School.
Great school, yeah.
At the time, it had a real reputation and sort of pipeline into the big consumer packaged goods companies. And Nabisco, which was a freestanding company at the time, was one of those. And I, I thought it would be good for myself to have sort of a classic consumer packaged goods marketing job. And I mean, those sort of jobs still exist. An interesting thing about that is that as you know, if you're in the product management team on Fleischmann's margarine, you're not thinking about Oreos or Fig Newtons or Jello pudding. It's just that product, and you think about the product from all sides. And in that way, it, in a way, is good training for being an entrepreneur. You're thinking about the packaging, how it tastes, the advertising, the merchandising coupons, the distribution channels. You're not in control of all of those things, but it just has a particular product focus that I think is good training for anything, and including being an entrepreneur.
So, not a fan of margarine, but you gained some good work experience there that I'm going to guess you were able to leverage as you started your own pet food manufacturing company.
So, and you can, at that point in my life, I was very my idea of products were physical products that you could hold in your hand. I didn't think of services or education as a product as I now do. And I started a company called Wagging Tail Limited, and I was trying to put it in names you'd be more familiar with, the Ben and Jerry's of dog and cat snacks. I was also inspired by these brands that are, we don't think of them at all as innovative anymore, but back in the late 80s and 90s they were, and things like Celestial Seasonings Tea and Smart Food and Snapple, which were had sort of a between the different flavors and the packaging, they had a little bit more of a lifestyle type positioning. And to younger people today, that wouldn't make any sense, but at the time it did. So I was trying to do that with pet snacks, and a good friend of mine joined me as a partner in the business, and we did a lot of things right, but we just, the way I described it is we picked the wrong products, because dogs eat a lot, and dog snacks are often bought in bulk, and cats don't eat very much. And of our two lines, the cat snacks did better. And at the point we were able to sell the company, not for any great multiple or success, but it was maybe the product called Jackie's Cat Snacks. If there's anyone out there listening who remembers that brand, I'll be please send me an email. But maybe we were in 2,000 supermarkets, which sounds pretty good, and it was the better Stop and Shops or Vaughn's or Ralph's or Jewel, whatever city you're in. The problem is that a loyal user would buy about a box a month for $2.50, of which we made 30 cents. So even though I was a Kellogg MBA, maybe I hadn't done the math. And when a loyal customer is spending that little, and you compare that to Ben and Jerry's or Snapple or Smart Food, it was just hard to make it much of a business. And we were competing at the time with cat snack products from Ralston Purina, Quaker Oats, and Heinz. So it was really
boys.
Yeah, it was amazing that we got as far as we did, but it was just a bad idea.
Do you think it was a bad idea, or do you think it was ahead of its time? People loved and doted on their pets back then, but they do so a lot more now. Do you think that idea would have had more legs today?
Maybe. I don't know. I think the underlying math of being a very small business, a startup in that space, wouldn't have worked out well. I did get, and the products were made by co-packers, who would make smaller brands for companies. And I remember getting the advice from, the owner of one of the co-packers, who, if he was alive now, would probably be 110. and he was giving me, grandfatherly advice. He said, Rick, your idea is interesting. I admire entrepreneurs, but I think you should think about main meal pet food and higher quality. And I've heard of these brands called Science Diet and IAMS that are just they're catching steam out west, and maybe there's more potential there. And it just seemed more difficult and bulky products, and so I really didn't go in that direction. And of course, that's where, in terms of the pet food market, that's where the growth was. I mean, it was, there was a time when everything was bought uh, in old school, well, in supermarkets or old school pet supply stores.
Yeah.
Anyway, but enough about pet food.
Enough about pet food. How did we get from pet food to you acquiring ICE? Where did the idea come about?
So the what I actually acquired in 1995 was what I call the predecessor school. It was called Peter Kump's New York Cooking School.
Okay.
It was on the Upper East Side in New York City, and it was started by a gentleman named Peter Kump. He started as one kitchen. I mean, it started in his apartment. Then they moved to a real space. He is also well known. He was the the founding president of the James Beard Foundation. He was friendly with Julia Child and James Beard, and this is in the late '80s. Before I was ever involved, you could say the culinary world was a lot smaller then, and all of those names I just mentioned were people were friendly with one another. But anyway, the story of how I got to be interested in that is pretty interesting. So in this pets, I had moved from being a corporate person to an entrepreneur. And after we sold the pet snack business, I was looking for a way to stay an entrepreneur, but by finding a small business to buy, or maybe finding a family business, someone else's family, where there was no succession plan. And I was, looking at deals, but small deals. And at one point, something that came across the radar was, believe it or not, the Barbizon modeling schools, which I don't even know if any exist anymore. And it was run as a franchise business. They tended to be, and these were essentially after school programs for teenagers, mostly girls. There was, they used modeling as the hook, but it was really about teaching poise and manners and self-confidence, and if you think of it that way, it was a service and an education business. And I spent a few months leaning into that, and decided it wasn't for me, but it sort of was
kind
one
of
of
opened your mind to this idea of like education.
My mind, yeah. And so I was working with a series of brokers, and I said, I had never mentioned this before, but could you do a search of education businesses within a 30-mile radius, under a certain size, and see what you come up with, and then make cold calls. And I wasn't in the room when this happened, but one day there was a call, hi, I'm Rich DeMichael from the Woodbridge Group, and we have a client that might be interested in investing in or buying, your school. And the phone call was taken by the general manager of Peter Kump's New York Cooking School. And he said, yes, there might be an interest, because Mr. Kump himself was having a relapse of cancer, and there was no succession plan. And, ever since then, personally, I've had a soft spot for cold calls, whereas, the normal person hangs up after 2 seconds. I give them at least 7 or 8 seconds because I see how it worked out for me. And, and it all happened very, very quickly. And part of the equation in my mind, I mean, I didn't know anything about cooking schools or education, or didn't know that much about, the restaurant business. But I figured the way to make it grow was through product development and marketing and branding, and therefore I could add value. And I always have been, no foodies don't like the phrase foodie, but I am a foodie. And it's not just enjoying food, but the cultural aspects, the historic aspects, the geographic aspects, the social aspects. Um, so really, and the school was a real school, but it was small. It was sort of breaking even. It had a professional program that wasn't very professional, but well thought of. If you can,
Okay, it was well respected, but
yeah, it was, and
there were areas for improvement, room for improvement.
yeah, and there were a
Yeah.
lot of things. Uh, it was sort of like a bourgeois trade school, where it was a trade school where 2/3 of the students had already been to college. But as far as cooking and cooking fundamentals, um, it was well regarded. And by the way, Peter Kump had started it as a recreational cooking school. And when I say it was professional, he had loyal students who wanted to take more and more classes and have a progressive sequence, and so he gave them some sort of credential. It wasn't accredited. And
So
anyway, I you know someone like you might ask me a question on an interview like this, what advice would you give to other would-be entrepreneurs? And I would never advise someone to do what I did, which is to jump into a business they know nothing about. But I couldn't wait. The timing was everything. It would have gone in some other direction, and building the business has been a huge financial commitment. But at the time, at that starting point, it wasn't that big, and yeah, it just
so help us understand kind of what it looked like when you took over. You said most of the students had already been to some sort of college, started out as like recreational cooking, but people wanted this progression. And so were people just looking to, most of them at the time anyways, looking to get better at cooking at home? Or were they wanting to turn this into a career or enhance a career in culinary that they already had?
By 1995, when I got there, it was I would say it was mostly for career, but his recreational classes and some of the ones we still have today. There's a very well-known course called Techniques of Fine Cooking Level 1. It's 5 lessons. Then there was a level 2, then a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and all of a sudden, people are taking 50 lessons, and it was extremely French. But it was teaching. Well, frankly, it was teaching a lot of the fundamental techniques that a good chef, whether it was a new American or a French chef in New York City, would want you to know. And in that regard, it was training for professional cooking. But a lot of the things that go along with a professional training school, we weren't doing yet. They weren't doing yet.
And so what was your initial vision as you came in 1995? How were you going to get this from breaking even to turning a profit?
Well, first I had to learn the business versus learning it before I bought it. So there's that timing thing, and sort of deciding whether there was more potential on the recreational side or the career side. And if you think about it, recreational, your possibility could be millions and millions and millions of people in a country of 350 million people. On the career side, it's more serious. There's only so many people who want to be chefs or pastry chefs or restaurateurs. But I think I came to the conclusion that if you had a serious, well-regarded career school, you could put things underneath that that could do well. But if you tried to go the other way, the recreational school wouldn't get the prestige of a career school.
So if you started as a career school,
well,
if you wanted to, you could also offer those recreational classes because you would have the prestige.
And we did, and it's so as we've grown in other ways, we've cut back on the recreational classes, but we were, for sure the largest place of hands-on recreational classes per year. A lot of cooking classes. I mean, in wherever someone is who's listening to this, there might be a cooking class at their local Williams-Sonoma. And what that class is it's a demonstration class. You're sitting, you're watching, maybe you're called up and you help the chef and you taste something. But, to us, cooking school has always been fully hands-on and, 3-4 hour classes. And, instead of, if there's 16 students in the class, there's 6 ranges, not one range. Um, so, the one of the so the ways so I pretty quickly determined that the way to grow was on the career side, and that meant doing things like having a real externship program, getting accredited, financial aid, a uniform a uniform policy where, just like if you were working in a professional kitchen, you'd be wearing a uniform. We back, when I got there, there weren't as many classes and fewer classes for day. Every class ended with eating what you had cooked and some wine. How many other trade schools have every class?
Sounds like a pretty good deal. That's a class I'd want to take.
No wonder it was popular. Yeah, and again, it's pretty. If you think of us as a sophisticated or fancy trade school, for a trade school to grow out of a recreational school in any field is pretty unusual.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe in massage therapy or something like that.
So what was the biggest challenge in making that transition? Was it the accreditation?
No, the biggest challenge was, first of all, it's a very place-based business. So at some point you need more kitchens to have a bigger business, and kitchens are expensive to build. And then, there are other schools, and the facility needs to be attractive and aspirational. As education goes, culinary schools are expensive to run. I mean, every school you could think of, whether it's a third grade class or a college English class, you need a teacher, you need an instructor, and you need a space. But in the case of a culinary school, you have all this equipment, you have all these utilities, you have all the food and ingredients, and inherently your students make a mess, so you got to clean it up. So no wonder culinary schools cost more.
So how are you funding all of this?
A combination of family loans and some savings and bank loans. Some of we moved several times, and when you sign a new lease for substantial space, there's what's it called, a tenant work letter. Some amount of money from the landlord, but it's been I would have to say, to the extent that culinary schools are a place-based business, it's expensive to grow, but those are also barriers to entry to other people, right, let alone the rent and all of that.
So at what point, actually, let me ask this a slightly different way. Was there a big inflection point where you felt like, oh, this is finally working?
Well, there was, the Department of it's when we got Title IV funding from the U.S. Department of Education, just like every other college.
What does that mean? What is Title IV funding?
Well, it's federal student loans, and you can use those federal student loans to go to University of Chicago or Bridgeport Community College or Apex Trade School, or trade schools that are big enough to sort of manage all that. And it's a source of lower interest loans and or grants, and that sort of puts you in the bigger league. And it does, and of course, as you do that, you can only be part of the federal student loan system if you've been accredited, and you can only be accredited if you're approved by your state. And all of that comes with a level of regulation and compliance that most people would be surprised. You'd think, oh, a cooking school, what do they have to comply with? Well, you'd be surprised, and it's all because people can get, if they want and qualify and choose to take them, federal student loans, and some of the rules are a little. It's one of those government cases where they paint with a very wide brush, and and uh, it's broadly speaking in the name of consumer protection, but it makes things harder, like changing our prices. If you think about it, so if we had a class beginning soon and somebody came along who couldn't afford uh, the school, and we're not like a huge institution with lots of scholarships from endowments, we can't give a break to somebody at the last minute. Um, an airline can do it, a hotel can do it, a restaurant can do it, even at colleges. Think about it. You talk to 50 people who go to the certain college, and they paid 50 different prices for all sorts of reasons that are not particularly bad, but at least there's that flexibility. In a typical, licensed vocational school like ours, you're just not allowed to do that. And if I was lobbying to the Department of Education, well, there's no Department of Education left. This is something I'd point out, is if there was more dynamic pricing, we could lower our price for some people and provide, when it made sense, and provide more opportunity, but we're not allowed to.
So you're saying that colleges and universities have the legal flexibility to be able to adjust their prices. Vocational institutes are bound by different rules?
That's pretty much exactly the case. You might think of it as, you've heard the expression, the ivory tower. Well, things are different at the top of the ivory tower than the bottom of the ivory tower.
Okay. Interesting. I had no idea.
Yeah. I mean, very, very few people think of it that way. There's also another oddity in U.S. Financial aid, in that it's almost easier to get more money to go to school longer than it is to get money to go to school shorter amount of time. So it encourages schools to make their programs longer when it might not even be necessary. If you're talking about training to be a brain surgeon, I think that training should go on a long time. But there are other fields. But this is a lot about Department of Education regulations.
Yeah.
So did it? I had the natural sunshine on me. It's got am I still light enough, or should I?
Well, one side of your face is light, and then we've got a dramatic effect on the other side. If you
that's
as you're playing with the lighting, I'll kind of move into my next question, because I'm curious, because you're a marketing guy, right? You got the MBA. What were some of the big marketing growth levers that you were able to pull? So you go through the accreditation process, right? You get the ability to be able to, accept student loans. But how did you get the word out? How did people know that ICE was a thing and come to you guys?
Well, the hold on a second here. The central part of it is, it really goes back to creating a great school and having good products and a strong brand. There's word of mouth and reputation really plays a big part. And as you may know, we're a big culinary school with lots of different programs, but this is all we do. We're focused in this field. There's other larger, often publicly traded trade school companies where they have automotive technology and medical reporting and culinary, and that sort of combination. And in those scenarios, the leadership, the ownership is not going to be as focused in the culinary field as, say, I am in what we do. So that's part of it. But to talk about the tools, in the earlier years, there was TV advertising, sometimes those late night commercials. print advertising. I mean, in all the years I've been doing this, uh, the idea of digital advertising um, has certainly developed and changed so much. I mean, it's changed the whole world of marketing, and first digital advertising and search engine optimization, and then somewhere along the way, social media has come along, and of course, that's a huge driver of for gaining um, awareness and reputation. And as you may know personally, or for some of your other guests, it's really gotten quite complicated. We spend X millions of dollars on that, and how you spend that and getting the most for that is very complicated. Um, the big companies in that space, Google and Meta, they work with you, but they also want to grow, and uh, there's the whole, in so much of life now, we all, you hear people talk about the algorithms. Well, in school advertising and how we spend our money, algorithms matter, and there's things most of it we can't control, and my marketing team we figure it out. We work with outside consultants, and 8 months later, the rules of the road have changed.
Yeah, you gotta stay on your toes with this for sure. Talk to us, Rick, a little bit about the programs that you offer and the kinds of folks that you're seeing come through the program.
Yeah, well, the first the core is culinary arts. We also have pastry and baking. We have a health-centered culinary arts. We have restaurant and culinary management, and then we have hospitality management, and then there's shorter, more specialized programs still at a professional level in bread baking, cake decorating, and sommelier training. And for all those programs, the main credential is a diploma. And interestingly, that's something that you can earn in about 7 or 8 months. And that's going to be a surprise to a lot of your listeners. Um, you know, a lot of some of the, there aren't as many culinary schools in America as there used to be, but some of the ones that are out there, and many of the ones that existed in the past, they really stressed associate's degrees, which can generally take 2 years. Now we have two campuses. We're in New York City and in the Los Angeles area. Actually, in Pasadena, we have a campus. In California, we are licensed to offer an associate's degree, and somebody could get through that in about 15 or 16 months, less than 2 years. And then both, again, in California or New York, you could go through a diploma in 7 or 8 months. We have joined the game of online degrees, also run out of our California location. People always ask, well, can you really learn cooking, online? And it is it's challenging. I would say here's one way of looking at it. It costs half as much as being on campus, but you learn 65% as much. So, the math is pretty good. And what you have, we have to the best of our ability, we've applied the same series of sequential foundational techniques over 52 weeks that we would, online, that someone would do if they were on campus. And it is true, clearly, that there's no chef instructor there to taste what you've made, but the discipline of feedback is much more than you would think, from video and photos and description, and a good chef instructor can tell a lot by looking and hearing, even if they haven't tasted. Is it as good as being on campus? No, but if for whatever reason you can't get there, it's a reasonable substitute.
So, speaking specifically of the in-person programs, whether it's the 7 to 8 month program or the 15-month program, when people graduate, what are they prepared to do? What does that line them up for?
Well, you're prepared to get an entry-level job in the kitchen of a very good restaurant. And typically there's different stations in a kitchen. They may call it garde manger, which would be making appetizers or salads. Sometimes it could be a junior line cook um, in a there's a lot of French terminology in kitchens, even if there's no French people. And if you were to go to if you were to go to the kitchen at Thomas Keller's French Laundry or Daniel Boulud's uh, restaurant Danielle, there's a position called commis, COMMIS. Bet that's a word you've never heard of, and that's sort of like entry level, gotten some good training, must be serious position. So that's the answer. And on the pastry and baking side, it could be as an assistant pastry chef. Pastry departments are obviously smaller, and some people, it's interesting. If you were, can I talk about what people's ambitions are?
Yeah, I assume that people are coming in, they want to be a chef for the rest of their life.
In half the case, that is
Okay.
true, and in half the case, it's not. I think if you were to, go talk to our students right now, or the same thing at the Culinary Institute of America, and ask what people want to be doing in 5 years, maybe half would say restaurant chef, but for other people, it's being a personal chef or a caterer, or moving with their significant other to an island and opening a bed and breakfast. It could be, I've met people who like selling things, and maybe they sold computer equipment, and now they'd like to sell pastry and baking equipment to hotels and country clubs. There's the whole food media realm. Realistically, there's a limited number of jobs there, but at our school, we just have had a tremendous track record of people sort of launching these alternative careers. We've one of my more interesting examples is a guy named Dr. Nate Woods, and he was going to Wayne State Medical School in Michigan, took a year off, moved to New York, went through our culinary arts program, went back to medical school, and now he is on faculty at Yale Medical School, teaching culinary nutrition to future doctors.
Wow.
And his culinary school training in the middle of medical school. We've had people who've started nonprofits. There's a guy named Andrew Riggi who started the New York City Hospitality Alliance. He's, New York's incoming Mayor Mondami has asked Andrew to be on an advisory committee for restaurants and nightlife. So there's, and something, and there's other people who work in test kitchens. I can think of a graduate who works for McCormick Spice Company, developing recipes using their spices. So all of that is far afield from being a restaurant chef.
Interesting. So you started out in New York. Obviously, that's where it was based when you first acquired the business and started to grow it. And you've already referenced the second location that you have out in Pasadena. Why do a second location? You talked about how expensive it is to open up physical locations. Yeah.
Well, because we found a way to do it inexpensively.
All right, let's hear about that.
No, I would say the part of me that's just solely ambitious. I wanted something more than New York. I wanted it to be more of a national business, and certainly having the biggest culinary school in the two biggest cities in America, makes me feel like we have a national business. But the specific is there was a big, going back 15, 20 years ago, a company called Career Education Corp., a public corporation that had a culinary school division, and they operated all of the Le Cordon Bleu culinary schools, or Le Cordon Bleu College of Culinary Arts. And it's a longer story that your listeners don't want to hear right now, but that type of business and the way they were set up and their relationship with the government at some point stopped working. So they decided to get out of the culinary education business. We were interested in, they had 16 locations in 16 cities. It was much too big to buy. And we entertained buying one or two of their locations. They decided for certain reasons they didn't want to sell any of them, and they were going to close them out on an orderly basis. And so it's to stay in the good graces of the Department of Education. Well, through that process, we were familiar with all of their leases. And in Pasadena, they had a lot of time left on the lease. They were planning on paying the lease, but not using the space. And so we approached them with a win-win, situation. Could you, if you would give us a discount on the lease and some incentive, we would legally assume it from you. And that was a good idea right from the start. And it needed a little refurbishment, but basically it was already built. And so, and we had just finished our huge, very expensive build out of where we are in New York City. And I almost feel like if whatever that number is, if that cost 100%, for just 2 or 3% more, we got another campus. And again, it was sort of like the situation of me acquiring Peter Kump's New York Cooking School to begin with, is that it's when the opportunity came up, but it couldn't wait very long. It would have gone away, and to replicate what we were able to take over, would have cost infinitely more.
Yeah, timing was critical here, just like it was when you first purchased the business. And so how quickly were you able to staff it up and then fill it up with students?
Well, we were looking at some of their other locations first, and at the same time. And one of the considerations of which we could only pick one city, and we were also evaluating who did we meet there that was working there, that was soon knew they were going to be unemployed because the school was closing, would be interested in working with us, and that we liked and were simpatico. And in Pasadena, it was I guess sort of the sun, the moon, and the stars line. There was a good facility with a good lease and a motivated seller of the lease. The man who was the campus president there was very interested. Frankly, he saw us working with us as a way for him to keep the job that he liked. And it also was interesting because, years prior to when this is all happening around 2018, years prior, that school was just huge. It had more space and leases than we took over. But he was familiar with 200 or 300 over the coming years. There's literally hundreds of people who've applied to work for us there who once worked where he worked. Not necessarily for him, but he knew of them.
Yeah.
so he could do a first level of
it's an easy filter for him. Yeah.
It's an easy filter. It's like, I remember that was my coworker in 2003. Did I like her?
So what's the future of ICE look like? More campuses, more programs, kind of stay in the course?
Well, one of the challenges for us and the other culinary schools in America and the restaurant trade is that increasingly young Americans are not attracted to working in service businesses, and there's and the restaurant part of it has a reputation. There's a reputation about how hard it is, and then there's also the comparison to other things someone could do, maybe jobs and careers they don't even want, but it seems easier. And and all of this is tough for the restaurant trade. And I know you interview a lot of restaurateurs and restaurant owners, and I'm sure they all talk about staffing as an issue. And, yes, there are, we haven't mentioned the word entrepreneur yet, from the point of view of that, so many of our students have entrepreneurial dreams and aspirations. And, it starting anything is difficult. I'm, so let me just, I don't know if you hear my phone beeping. I just got to turn it off. Hold on.
Sounds like a little drummer boy over there.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is appropriate as we record this on December 22nd.
Right. So, but for everyone who wants to be an entrepreneur, you need people who are going to work for those entrepreneurs. And overall enrollment in culinary school is flat. And the when obviously with 30 years experience, I have a pretty good perspective on all of this. And the idea that we should go out and open 5 or 6 more doesn't necessarily seem like a good idea. But one of the specific things is I was talking before about the value that we bring because our programs are faster and are diploma oriented. But for people who haven't gone to college, getting an associate's degree, does have higher value. And for reasons that are bureaucratic and hard to explain, in New York State, it is very hard for us or for any other trade school at this point to get the credentials to offer an associate's degree. But that is something we're working on, and that would be a good source of growth, and it would be great. It would draw people to our school and other schools, and then into the restaurant field, and would be a good thing. But that's my Albany problem.
Yeah, I get it. Plus, coming out of COVID, a lot of people left the service industry, haven't come back. It's made staffing tough. Like you said, some people aren't interested in being in the field. But for those folks who do come through your schools, Rick, I wonder what help are they getting in terms of job placement? Do you have relationships with, a lot of the restaurants out there that are looking for folks?
Well, in most of our programs, an externship is required. And, we have a fantastic relationship with, the biggest and best restaurant groups in New York and other parts of the country, and then in Los Angeles. About half the time, the externship turns into a job offer. When it doesn't, it's for all, maybe there's just no space or no opening. But in New York City, the restaurants of Eric Ripert and Danny Meyer and Tom Colicchio and Jean-Georges Vongericht, and we have people in them all the time. And we don't have any advertisements to say this, but you could say, we get our people into some really good doors, and I mean the kitchen door, and that would be hard to do on your own. And there is a real, whether it's Chicago, New York, Atlanta, the bigger chef-driven restaurants that are focus on good food and a high-level experience generally have people running them who have kitchens where you will get good training, and that training can, so if you think of it this way, if let's say your local paper has a star system. If you're right out of culinary school and you can get an entry-level job at a 3-star restaurant, you're going to be at the bottom of the totem pole, but the habits you're going to learn, the things you're going to see, the quality of the ingredients will be really informative when you get your second job, at a 2-star restaurant. And then when you get, become a sous chef or a chef de cuisine at a 1-star restaurant, you're going to have that training that you got in the better places. And that's sort of a system and a way of job development that exists all over America and all over the world in a sense. And it's, do you have to go to culinary school to get in those kitchens? You don't, but it would be hard otherwise. And yeah, that, and it's also when you begin to do that, you also meet people like yourself. You become part of a community. We have 20,000 alumni at this point, and many of them, I mean, there's people who have, you know, met at, I mean, I can think of one couple. They were both, junior people working at Thomas Keller's Per Se in New York. They met there, started dating, went off working at other places, got married, and now they have 3 or 4 restaurants of their own, doing well, children, good marriage, and they met being junior employees at a great restaurant. And it's interesting. Um, our tagline is "Find Your Culinary Voice," which was suggested to us by a marketing agency probably about 20 years ago. And when I first heard it, I thought it was sort of corny. And then pretty quickly I realized it fits so well because that's what people want to do. And we find that so many of our students have some cultural or ethnic background, be it Swedish or Turkish or Japanese or Korean. And somehow, so often, once they get to be executive chefs or chef owners, they express that in their cooking. So, for example, this couple I was talking about, they had a restaurant that was highly regarded called Uncle Boone's Kitchen. Now they have a place called Thai Diner in New York City, very popular. It's not fancy, and the food is, you would recognize it as Thai, but the sauce, these 2 chefs have worked in a kitchen where people were classically trained, and they understand how to make sauces in a French way. And you taste this Thai food, and it's just better. And they, couldn't have. I mean, and Anne is, yes, I missed that point. Anne's cultural background is Thai. Her husband is as American could be. They have a smaller restaurant, or they have in the past, that focused on roast beef sandwiches. So there's nothing Thai about that.
Yeah, right.
But this idea of people finding their culinary voice is really interesting, and you see it play out time and time again.
And you were talking about this idea of community, and I know you've given back through organizations like City Harvest and Join Israel. How have you seen work with these types of groups affect positive change that you're talking about?
Yeah, let me. I'm going to put on a light in the room that I'm in. Another light. This is funny. I mean, I had the shade closed because there was too much sunshine.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay,
for folks who are just listening to the audio, and the video component of this, we're filming later in the day, and the sun has been setting, and so it's presenting, all kinds of shadows for Rick, who still looks handsome as can be. But
yeah,
so talk about City Harvest, Join Israel, the idea of the community aspect of what you like to get involved with.
Well, overall, I like the idea of giving back and doing what I can do to make the world a better place. You mentioned those 2 charities. There's some other ones too, and I did want to share my philosophy about where to give, whether it's your time, your brain, or your money. And so City Harvest is New York City's primary and largest food relief agency. So since the schools in New York City, and our market is national, but we certainly, the biggest majority of the people are already in the New York area. And City Harvest, for years, well predating me, always looked to the restaurant community for support and some visibility. I was initially on like a culinary industry advisory council, and then moved up to the regular board. But the what I wanted to share was, while I, said I'd like to make the world a better place, I admit when I wake up in the morning, that's not on my to-do list most days, and it's hard to do. And that's true of most people. But I know people that I've been introduced to, or that maybe used to work for me, who have decided to become, full-time professional do-gooders. I call them, like angels, and there's big time angels like Mother Teresa and Jose Andres, and then there's the angels you don't know. And and my thought is that all of us, when we can, should support the angels, the little angels that we know, because other people don't. They have their own angels. It's like when I ask some of my friends to make a donation to some of these charities, they say maybe, but it's going to be very small. They're not, they don't know that angel. They're not they have their own angels. And it's almost like investing in venture capital, or in venture capital, it's better to make a lot of it. I mean, venture capitalists make a lot of investments, not just one. And they pick them for various reasons. So for example, there's a charity I support called Streets International, and it was started by a man who used to teach restaurant management at the school, and he and his significant other moved to Vietnam and started a culinary and hospitality training program for sort of 17 to 21-year-olds from backgrounds where they would probably never have a career, but if they learn, some front of house hospitality skills, some culinary skills, and some rudimentary English, they can work in the burgeoning tourist trade in Vietnam forever. And I know this guy. I admire what he's doing. It's quite an entrepreneurial feat that he got this off the ground. You can imagine the local people in Hoi An, Vietnam saying, you want to do what with these young people? And, because I appreciate him and know him, I feel like I should support him, because 99.9% of the world is never going to know him or appreciate him the way that I do. And if everybody looks in their life and does the same sort of thing, then we can do a lot of good.
I love that. Rick, I think I've just got one more question for you today, but before I ask it, I want to do three quick things. First of all, anybody who wants to get in touch with Rick, two options. First of all, for the Institute, you can just go to ice.edu. Very short, easy to remember, ice.edu for the Institute of Culinary Education. And if you want to get in touch with Rick directly, he's given us his email address that we can share. Smilow at ice.edu. And we'll have links to both of those things in the show notes. Also, as a reminder, if you want to get more employees access to therapists, doctors, and prescription medications that, I don't know, can you believe it? Like actually puts more money into the company's pocket, reach out to us at addbackbenefits.com. And if you're enjoying the show today, a quick comment or review on your favorite podcast app goes a long way. It means more than you might think. So thank you. So last question for you, Rick. We've talked about some of your ups, some of your downs, but I'd be interested in exploring a big, serious challenge that you've overcome in your life, how you navigated that and what you learned coming through it.
It's not the most profound answer, but it was about, within New York City, we've had 3 different homes. And as I think I alluded to before, it's a very place-based business. Our facility now, we have like 9 restaurant kitchens in what would be the equivalent of it's sort of a nice New York City office building. It's all very expensive to build. So we had a location on 23rd Street, and the lease was coming up, and we hired a broker to go with us to negotiate a renewal, and did all the research and all of that. And we go to the landlord, and the first thing he says, like, "Hello, gentlemen," and how are you? Let me make this meeting very short. We like you guys, but we don't want to talk about a renewal. I have other ideas for the space. I sort of look
Oh
around like,
man.
you know, could you repeat that? And he repeats it, and I say, but David, this is going to be really hard. It's a hard business to move. It's gonna, uh, it's gonna, and this is was a point in New York City's chronology when a lot of building going on and very expensive. Not that it's ever not been expensive. And he says, well, I know that, Rick, but you're a smart guy and you'll figure it out, and in the end, you'll be better. But I sort of mutter, like, if this isn't the end. And it was living through that, and the whole combination of finding where to move to, finding, designing something we felt good about, then being able to pay for it, and these are, if you're building in Manhattan, it's probably going to be in some mixed use building. So there's all sorts of complications. It's a lot of union construction. And you didn't ask me this, but for a lot of business owners, they would say the toughest thing was the pandemic, and, working through it, and whether it was keeping employees or keeping the business open. We were able to reopen on a limited basis after 6 months in the pandemic, and, on a voluntary basis, and a lot of our students, keep in mind, they weren't living in dormitories. They were living wherever they lived. They would travel there. A lot of them are sort of in the 20 to 30-year-old range. They weren't 17 or 18-year-olds with their, and I mean, where colleges were closed, we were able to open, and we had all sorts of protocol, and people were tested, and, thermo, forehead readers. But I realized when we were doing that, everyone in the world, business and consumer, but every business was going through the same thing. So you had a lot of company and all of that. But when you have a big place-based business, and you're going to lose your lease, it's only your problem. There was my key team to go through with, and my family. But I sort of uniquely remember during the pandemic thinking, oh, this isn't as bad as or as expensive as what we had to do before. And anyway, I'm not alone in this. Everybody's going through this.
With the non-lease renewal, yeah, you're on an island by yourself for the most part.
And I've always, I have a lot of resilience. I'm good at, I don't know that I'm good at figuring things out quickly, but eventually figuring them out, and what if, and should we try this, and eventually work to a solution. But that was, it was quite a shocker when when the meeting.
So what was the solution? How did you work through it?
I mean, if
you found a new location,
coming up with a plan, and what we thought we could afford, and of course it ends up costing much more, and then you got to deal with that. But that, by the time that you figure out it's going to cost a lot more, you've already begun. And just a lot of hard work and resilience and borrowing, and but that was hard.
Any bigger picture lessons that, now that you kind of look in the rearview mirror, that are, I don't know, you're able to apply to today, or kind of pushed you in a different direction that you wouldn't have gone in had you not gone through this hardship?
No, I don't think so. I mean, in an ideal world, if you have a place-based business, it's nice to own the space, but and we did have to think of, I mean, for those of you that are familiar with the New York City geography, when we had to move, we thought about, well, what about Jersey City or Hoboken in New Jersey, or what about Brooklyn section, and those would have been easier, certainly less expensive solutions, but they're not as easy to. The thing about Manhattan and New York City transportation is sort of all lines, roads, but train lines and subway lines, sort of converge in Manhattan. And it just, we said, to keep and we had a major competitor at the time who we've since subsumed or acquired, which we haven't even talked about. But there was just we got to figure out how to stay in the Manhattan part of New York City.
It was sort of keeping up with the Joneses to some degree.
Keeping up with the Joneses, or
got to be where your clientele is.
Yeah, and how they can get there. I mean, frankly, most of our students do not live in Manhattan. And so if they live in New Jersey or Brooklyn or Bronx or Westchester, they will cross a bridge somehow, whether it's by subway or commuter train or car. And sort of the thought was anyone will cross one bridge or tunnel to go to school, but almost no one will cross two.
So if you were in Jersey and your students were in Brooklyn, they're not coming, or
That's
vice versa.
Exactly.
And so real quick, how did that happen? The acquisition, or what was the other word you used?
Well, it was called the French Culinary Institute,
okay.
And they eventually changed their name to the International Culinary Center. And, when I began all this, they were a bigger, more prominent school. Then we sort of got even in terms of all that. Then they were for sale, but nobody, they always wanted too much money. We were interested, and then they would lower the price, and no one was interested, and we were still in the lower range. What they didn't count on was the pandemic. They went into it in a weaker state, and just didn't have the staying power. And then we were always there as sort of the buyer of last resort. So we were able to we made a licensing arrangement with them where we would pay them over time on our growth because of them, but we didn't have to take their assets or assume their lease. We own. So this is I'm not the only story like this, but this is a case where the pandemic led to a merger and acquisition activity that wouldn't have happened without the pandemic. So the pandemic there's another reason why the pandemic wasn't so bad for the Institute of Culinary Education.
All right.
And all these things, I'm telling you, you've been hearing some anecdotes and stories over 30 years. You can't predict any of this stuff. And, over 30 years, a lot of things happen. Being committed to the business, proud of the business has been a key part of it. I have a partner in the business who, he's the day-to-day president of it. And if you were to ask him, well, what initially, going back 14 years ago, and if you asked him, well, what was your impression of Rick after the first meeting? He said, well, he seemed very committed and proud of the business, and I liked that. So there's a good lesson there.
I love it. Rick Smilow from Institute of Culinary Education, I want to be the first to thank you for sharing both your time and your story with us today. I really appreciate you, Rick.
All right. Well, it's been a pleasure, and I don't know how many emails I'm going to get. If there's anyone who took a class at Peter Kump's New York Cooking School, that would be or even with Peter Kump himself, that would be amazing. I only know of a couple people in the world I could point to who did that.
Well, maybe you get some reunions here.
Yes.
All right, folks, that's a wrap on another episode of the Inspired Stories podcast. I appreciate that. Thanks for learning with us today.